Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is a returning guest now for his sixth episode. It's Dr. Tom Teague, author of Online Business Success for Thought Leaders. Tom has spent more than 30 years in a traditional corporate career, leading software development teams to support collaborating engineering communities within large organizations. Now, Tom has left that life behind, and he now combines this practical experience perspective for building software systems with modern online marketing and sales skills. And he coaches thought leaders through a systematic way to create and deliver value for their communities using their online business systems. In past episodes with Tom, we were introduced to his best-selling book, Online Business Success for Thought Leaders, and to the 4 steps to the online business success system. Tom is returning today for his 6th and final episode, and we really thought it was a good idea if Tom would share case studies and anecdotes of how the online business success system was used to support his clients in achieving their online business goals. So without further ado, Tom, welcome back to the Success Insight podcast.
Hey, Howard. It's great to be here again. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. We have actually gone on a little bit of a journey as we have been getting an overview of your background, your career, and really, as you called it, your MBA in online marketing. You created this system, and really, as you were creating it, it became the material for your book, Online Business Success for Thought Leaders. And in this episode, I think it's just a great idea that we're going to communicate to our listeners, you're using this system, not only for yourself, but you're taking your own clients through it. And so I love the fact that we're going to provide a brief overview of the system itself, but also to get into the case studies and the anecdotes. So let's get started.
Sounds great, Howard. So just as a quick reminder, there are 4 steps in the online business success system. And step 1 is clarifying business strategy. Step 2 is selecting systems. Step 3 is creating online assets. And step 4 is sprinting to success. And just briefly on that first part, because it's critical, if you're getting very clear about your business strategy, the result of that is what I call the customer journey. And then getting very clear on that customer journey, it allows you, first of all, to use that to select your systems and to figure out which online assets to create. In other words, you only should create the assets that go with the customer journey. And then finally, the sprinting to success, there's lots of different things you can do to build an online business system. And the point is just build the pieces that you need to support the customer journey. So again, it's a very systematic approach, but it starts with getting clear on what your customer journey is.
Some entrepreneurs, Tom, very much, they have this idea of what they want, and they're off doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's the shiny object syndrome. And I think in the entrepreneurial space, my sense is sometimes it's hard to get them to slow down and let's look at the entire system. And I'm curious, perhaps anecdotally, perhaps just like an overarching theme, what's been the feedback from them as you have really asked them to slow down and to use a system to achieve their online marketing goals for their business?
I think the overarching reaction has been one of really great appreciation. When I work with people, I collaborate with them, to help them figure out what's the right strategy to go for their business. And then we go about implementing it using the sprints. And I'll just cite an example, actually, relative to writing books. So I've written 2 books. My first book, I wrote it kind of like a journal, and I just organized it later. The second book that I wrote, I actually took the time and I wrote out a very specific outline. And it was much easier to write this second book because I planned it out, and then I just systematically worked through the book creation process. So I think it's the same sort of thing about approaching an online business. Is like, in my experience, I think a lot of people have this experience. They attend a webinar or they go to a 2 or 3 day event and they get all excited about one particular aspect. And they go ahead and start implementing that. But if they haven't thought through the strategy, like how does that fit into my business? And, so it's easy to kind of spend a lot of time doing things and not necessarily being effective because it's not really supporting a strategic business strategy. I really feel like that first step of figuring out your strategy is so important. Then when you go to build things, even when you're attending new trainings and you have the perspective of where does this technology that I'm learning about in this new training, where does that fit into the overall picture? So I really do feel like it's helpful to have a structure for it. And I think the clients have felt that way too.
That's great. And speaking of clients, I mean, what would be an example you could share of how you took one of your clients through the system and, perhaps sharing a little bit about what their struggle was? Because many of these folks are experienced entrepreneurs. They have businesses. It's not like all of a sudden I have a career change and I need to build something. If they were like that, they probably would go out and build a website. They would be stuck for a while and figure out, well, this is not working, and they'll come to you. But these are experienced entrepreneurs and they realize they need to do something.
That's true. So thinking about experienced people, one of my clients is a very experienced business coach, and let's just call him Jim. And Jim had a WordPress site, and he was successfully using that website for what I would just call the offline business activities that I described in chapter 6.
Well, talk about the offline real briefly. What is that again?
Basically, it's like you're going to live events, could be specifically networking events, or it might be an educational event where you're there with a crowd of like-minded people and you meet people at the events. And so in the old days, pre-COVID, you might meet someone, you might exchange business cards. In the online COVID world, it's more like we attend events online. We meet people online, say in a breakout session, and then we exchange contact information. So it's basically traditional marketing and then follow-on sales, where you're basically meeting people one-on-one and then you're following up and having conversations with them.
Okay.
And he still does that. It's a core part of his business. But he was looking, and where he was at the time I met him was he was actually starting to teach classes online, using Zoom. But he didn't really have the infrastructure in place to do that. So we started talking about the possibility of using Kajabi and how would that fit in. And for example, his situation was he was manually sending out the emails, he was holding the Zoom meetings, and then he wanted to give people workbooks, downloads, and he wanted to give people access to the replays. And he did all that manually with regular email and Google Drive. So that's kind of where he was. So the first thing we did to kind of go back to the structure then in part 1, which is to get very clear about his business strategy. It's like he already had a business strategy in place, and it was really a question of evolving that business strategy to get that online course support, to get that moving online. And also he wanted to automate, because when you're sending all the emails yourself and setting up Google Drive folders and things, it's very labor intensive. So it'd be nice to set that up and automate it. So that's really where he was coming from. But he wasn't ready to move his WordPress site. And so I said, that's great. Basically, what we can do is we can just tie in one of your pages on your website to let people purchase the offer, say on Kajabi, and then Kajabi would handle the email automation and all the follow-up necessary for handling the course deliveries. So we did a selection of a system, and we had some discussion because there are some alternatives to Kajabi. So we had some consultation. Then we, part 2, then selecting a system. Jim decided to go with Kajabi, but we decided to just migrate to pieces of Kajabi over time. So the initial focus was online courses and setting up the login membership site. So in terms of the creating the online assets part 3, it's like we really focused on creating the course and creating the live events with the email automations that went with the live classes. Moving on to part 4, which is to do this in sprints, the first thing we did was sprint 1, which we talk about sprint 1 being live events. So doing a series of live classes is a really good example of doing live events. And setting up the payment pages and the email automations to get people to come to the event and to take the money and so forth. The next step, or I guess the related step to that, was setting up an online course inside of Kajabi's. I guess I would just call it the membership site area. Kajabi calls them products. So we set up an online product for his course. So that was sprint 5. After he had done a couple of courses this way, and we started migrating his sales pages over to Kajabi, he finally saw, it really made sense to go ahead and migrate his WordPress site. So we went ahead and moved his WordPress site over to Kajabi to do the hosting for that. So that was sprint 2, kind of the core website sprint. He wanted to get into online marketing and start building his list. And so we set up a lead magnet. So that was sprint 3, where we set up a lead magnet for him. And then most recently, he had been sending out broadcast emails using MailChimp. Kajabi has that function built in. So his weekly emails, we just decided, hey, we can do that. He can start posting those as blogs and still send the emails, but then send a link to the blog to actually. And then what that does is it opens up the possibility to share that not only on email, but to bring in links from social media. So to move on to the later sprints that talk about using social media. So we actually, over time, we've been working together for, it's probably been close to 2 years now. We've just evolved his website from where it was. It's fully a Kajabi site, and he's starting to move into social media. We're not really to the point of looking at, well, he's very open to JVs, for example, so joint venture marketing. We're not ready to try advertising yet. But anyway, it's just been a steady progression working through all the sprints that are described in part 4. So, the result is that we were able to successfully migrate his complete online business into Kajabi, including the website and the blog and everything that goes with an online platform. So it's been a successful project.
I can tell it's been successful. I mean, I do know this particular client of yours, and I've had a chance to visit his sites, I'm aware of his program. What has been his reaction to this evolution? Is it, wow, this is great, or God, I wish I had done this sooner, or glad we took the time? Because, so many people, they feel like they have to have everything in place and flip a switch, and all of a sudden they're in the online world, have a business, et cetera, et cetera. But this was a very gradual, methodical approach.
It was, and that fits his personality very well. And quite honestly, his business didn't necessarily need a really rapid evolution. So he took it at a pace. And I guess I should say this is a philosophy I have working with my clients is I want people to get the skills, so that they don't necessarily depend on me after a while. Taking at a slower pace, it allows him to build up his skill set. And he's to the point now where he does a lot of stuff on his own. He doesn't really need my help for stuff, that's really my goal, working with my clients, is to help them get to that point.
Sure. And you're there if they need you. They can always reach out and ask a question, which that's what I love about your approach to this type of work. So what's another example you could share with us?
Another one, I would call it an author and a book publishing coach. So again, a coach, but also an author. And her initial situation was that she was just finishing up the final phases of getting her book ready to launch. So her initial problem was she wanted to have a platform to launch her book, but she was also interested in creating an author publishing coaching program to go with it. So she kind of had a 2-phase implementation. The first phase we looked at was really actually the very first part. This was actually before we started working together. We just had some consulting discussions, some debates about whether to use WordPress versus, we got into the system selection a little early. She came to one of my early workshops, Howard, I think you might have met her. Anyway, her initial focus was on her book launch, but she always knew that she wanted an online platform to support her coaching business. So we worked through that. She selected Kajabi. And in terms of the online assets, she didn't really have a website. So we needed to build the core website along with a book launch page. At the time, she was pre-selling her hardback book because it wasn't ready. She wasn't ready to fulfill the orders, but she pre-sold the books. That's one of the ways you can use a book launch page is to pre-sell your book. Basically, starting with the workshop, we started working through, again, the same sprints that talk about in the book. So building the core website, that was sprint 2. In the workshop, we talked about she needs a lead magnet to build her list. So we did sprint 3, which is to set up a lead magnet. And then we did sprint 4, which was to do the pre-sale page for her book. So that was our initial kind of project working together. And then a little later on, she came up with a different marketing strategy for her coaching program. So what she did for that marketing strategy was she started off doing 5-day, now they're 3-day live event challenges. And the challenge is for aspiring authors to see, am I ready to, I'm interested, obviously, in writing a book. Let me get a taste of what it's like. So she does a 3-day live event. So we did sprint 1, she actually did most of sprint 1, but I did help her on the first one. And then she uses offline conversations, again, chapter 6. For people who come to her challenge, the outcome is to schedule time with her to close the sale on a coaching program. So she kind of does that mixture of online and offline marketing and sales. And then for the people in her coaching program, she has a membership area where she delivers her training content, basically her system, her book writing and publishing system. She has online training for her clients to have. So again, she's getting very successful results. I mean, she did well on her book launch, and her challenge has been done very well. She's been building her coaching business very successfully over the last year.
What has been her feedback to you about this journey she's been on?
Yeah, every time I talk to her, and she's been kind enough to share it with her author community too, she gives me credit for helping her get through the journey. She's kind of had the comments like, I'm not sure I could have done this all on my own. I really did need your help. And she's very complimentary about the coaching that I've given her.
That brings up a topic in how we deliver service. And I think before we end our podcast today, we'll talk about it. But some entrepreneurs out there who are marketing to other coaches and other entrepreneurs, and in some ways you're doing that too, is you're offering, here's a membership site, and here you can come on and consume this material and you can get through this on your own. But then there's also what I would call an upsell, which is the do with you, is come into this program. I'm going to coach you through it. I'm going to have emails, Zoom sessions, one-on-ones as a part of this do with you delivery. And then there's the full on, which is probably the most high ticket, which is, some folks are just so totally scared of this journey that they ask you, Tom, would you do this for me?
Yeah. And I work in all 3 of those modes. But one thing I tell my done for you clients is I'm really happy to help them do that because it helps kind of jumpstart. They know that would be a big barrier for them, so they're happy to have my help. But I always insist that, come to the training that I offer, because even for done for you clients, they still need to know how to send emails or to go in and tweak, some wording on a web page on their website. They think, oh, I can say this better. They shouldn't have to come back to me to just do a little tweak on a web page or to send an email. I like to be sure that people are somewhat self-sufficient. And then if they want to do another project or whatever, I'll be happy to help them with that. But I like for all my clients to have some basic skills.
I think that's great. And I think as an entrepreneur, we should know some of how this system works. We might not do it. We may source it out to a hired assistant, a virtual assistant. They may come back to you at a premium price and say, Tom, I need your help. Would you please do this? But they should have some understanding of how this machine is working, this system is working.
Yeah, I think so. And I plus, now that you mention it, one of my clients came to the workshop and brought her VA with her. And so I trained the 2 of them. So her VA does most of the work now, but at least she knows what's involved. I mean, the entrepreneur, the business owner knows what amount of effort is needed because she went through the training herself.
Great. Tom, in the interest of time, let's share another story. What you got for us?
Another woman entrepreneur. She's a consultant, speaker, trainer, and a podcaster. And let's just call her Dawn. So Dawn had a website. She's been doing her podcast for several years, but her website was out of date as she wanted to modernize her website. And also she wanted to shift the direction of her business a bit. Her kind of presenting problem was, help me get a new website up and going. We can pull from the old website as we need, but basically want to redesign the new website to match her new strategy. So we had those conversations. So again, part one, figuring out, okay, what's the focus of the effort? She also was in a situation where she had multiple systems. So she had a WordPress site and she had another training site and another system for doing emails and customer management. She was also interested in simplifying and consolidating her system. And she was already interested in Kajabi, so that was kind of a given going in. In terms of creating the assets, part three, mostly it was just trying to figure out what assets do we need for this redesign on our website. So that's what we did. We did basically Sprint 2 core website, but actually much more because her business model was further along, say, than a beginning entrepreneur. So we set up kind of several lines of business, one for consulting and training and speaking, and then another one was her podcast. And she also had some existing lead magnets. So we wanted to bring, she probably had more than that she really just wanted to focus on using 2 or 3 of them. So we brought those over, did Sprint 3 a few times. And then kind of an interesting thing, her podcast is actually on several platforms. And yeah, I know, Howard, you're very familiar with that. But she wanted to have full controls, of her content. So we decided to use Kajabi's blog feature to host her podcast. So that was Sprint 6. And then this is actually work still in progress. So she's setting up a new online course. So we're currently working on that. And then after that, we'll need to set up a sales page for that online course. So again, we're kind of hitting all the sprints, the sprints 1 through 6. And I would just say, we reached some success about several months ago. We flipped the switch and basically moved her old website onto her new website, and we've been going from there. So again, I think it's been very successful. Now, she's been more of a done-for-you client. So I've done most of the work. But again, when I'm doing done-for-you services, it's still a collaborative effort because it's important to me to work with the business owner to really align, to be sure they're getting what they need that aligns with their business vision for themselves. And so even though it's done for you, we collaborate on it regularly. And it's been a great success for both of us, I think.
I'm thinking as you were just describing, Dawn, is I need to go back and revisit with you, of course, is how I can present my podcast episodes onto my website, to the Fox Coaching website, perhaps more effectively than exists today. Because we've expanded. I mean, we're in our 3rd year and we're expanding into podcast series to a particular subject matter, as well as doing multiple series episodes, kind of like what you and I are doing right now.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, Howard, because she had that issue too. She's done her podcast over multiple years, and each year she kind of has a theme for the year, but then she has subtopic areas too. So the nice thing about the Kajabi blog is you can put labels on each episode, and then you can filter the blog display to bring up a topic area, or like in your case, it might be a podcast series, or it might, So I think it probably would fit pretty well with you.
Yeah, we'll have that conversation for sure. Tom, I'm curious if one of our listeners wants to reach out to you. Now, I know we're going to introduce the online business success book.com. So folks get a free copy. You're going to share your website shortly. If our listener comes across this podcast and it's like, wow, I think I could use Tom's help. What's that discovery call like with you? I mean, what are they going to experience when they have that initial call with you?
Well, what I like to do on those initial calls is mostly get acquainted with each other. And so we, share our backgrounds and share where we're coming from. I kind of share my story. So I have a backstory. I know every entrepreneur I talk to, they have their backstory. I really want to get to know the people that I work with. And so that first call, it's kind of a get to know you. But we also talk about what are you trying to accomplish in terms of your business and how does online fit into that? It's really more like I would want to get to know somebody and what their business is and to get a feel for it. Because it's not always true that going to online is the right thing to do, and there's some question of timing, like we've talked about. So I like to just have an exploration, and then I have as we talked earlier, I have different ways of working. If people want to go forward in one way or another, I do have ways to. One thing we can do is have a follow-on, kind of a strategy call to say, okay, let's figure out in detail what you might like to do. And of course, the book is designed to support people on that journey. So I would generally, encourage people to read the book because there's a lot of good background there. I also have some online training, that people can get through the book faster with the videos that I have. So there's some relatively low cost ways to get started, in terms of how I work. But some people, they just know they're ready and they want to move forward. So we might jump ahead and accelerate. Kind of depends on the person's situation. If they know they're ready to go, and we have a conversation and we like each other, and then we just go from there.
I love that approach. I mean, it's not well, if you have this discovery call, okay, if you sign up with me right now today, you're going to get this fee. And if you don't, if you got to go home and think about it, talk to your spouse, well, then the price tomorrow is double. No. And what's that fast action commitment? It's, I think at the end of the day, I mean, you and I, again, for our listeners, Tom and I know each other, and this was just a great opportunity, in Success Insight to not only to bring to the forefront a very important topic, especially for entrepreneurs. How do I build my business successfully and with a proven approach? And in Tom's book is so timely. And so I love the fact that we've had this conversation, and hopefully our listeners come across the feeling about you, Tom, is that you're somebody that's going to take good care of that potential client. You're not in there just to sell it and you're on to your next deal.
Yeah, no, I would just say I'm not transactional, I'm relational. I like to build relationships with my customers. And I also have a very strong value. I really intend for all the people that work with me to be successful, to get successful results on their outcomes.
Fantastic. Tom, before we head out, once again, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
Okay, so like you mentioned before, in terms of getting the book, there's a free book available at onlinebusinesssuccessbook.com. And again, it's a real paperback book, and all I request is you send me enough money to cover the mailing costs. I do have a website at choicedigitalstrategies.com. And also you can meet me on Facebook and LinkedIn. So again, Choice Digital Strategies, or there are several Tom Teagues on Facebook, but hopefully with the image that's on Howard's, you can figure out which one that is. And then also on LinkedIn, I have my handle on LinkedIn is Dr. Tom Teague. So Dr. Tom Teague. That's how you can find me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, we'll most definitely provide those backlinks to onlinebusinesssuccessbook.com, your website, Choice Digital Strategies, as well as your social sites. Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on Success Insight to really, I would say, lean in a little bit. I mean, I didn't force you to lean in a lot because you kind of knew what I was doing, how I approached the podcast itself. And this presented itself as an opportunity for you to, really share the important features and facets of this system that you have built, and really to help you promote the book. And for our listeners, if anything, get a copy of the book. The next step is get on a phone call with Tom and at least talk to him about what your goals and objectives are. And if he can help you, he'll help you. If you can't, he'll let you know that as well. And also, too, I mean, he's got multiple ways that you can work with him, whether it's the do-it-yourself training, his free lead magnets, and the done with you coaching, as well as the done for you professional services. So lots of great, very expedient ways to work with Tom. So take advantage of it. Tom, again, before we go, anything else that you want to share with our listeners, and any final thoughts, anecdotes? How do you feel about getting involved with this podcast? You were a great guest, and I appreciate you joining me on this journey.
Thank you, Howard. I can't tell you how much I've appreciated the opportunity to do this series with you. It's been fun. I've really enjoyed our conversations, and I hope your listeners have found what we've talked about to be insightful and useful for them. That's always a hope of mine. And I hope it's been a nice opportunity to, especially over several conversations, I think, for your audience to get to know me a little bit. So I really appreciate that opportunity. And Howard, I think you're doing a great job on this podcast, and I want to congratulate you. I know you've been at it now for about, what you said, 3 years. So so it shows. It's very professional and well done. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here and to meet your audience.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And I'm confident whoever listens to this podcast, there's going to be some folks out there that are going to be giving you a call. And folks, if you do decide to reach out to Tom, do let him know that you heard about him on Success Insight. It's always nice to know that, hey, this podcast of ours has some legs and there's some successful calls to action. Okay, folks. There you have it. We've been having interviews with Dr. Tom Teague, 6 interviews, as a matter of fact. And Tom is the author of the Online Business Success for Thought Leaders book. You can get it off of Tom's website, or you can go on to Amazon. It's on Kindle. It's a paperback. And in this series, Tom has really been dissecting what it means to get into this world of online business. And for the entrepreneur, the business owner, if this is an area you are in any way interested in, this is a great place for you to start and learn what it means to be successful online with your business. And you'll learn more about the online business success system, clarifying your business strategy, selecting your systems, creating your online assets, and sprinting to success. And today, we shared case studies, which I think is important because this is where the rubber really does meet the road. Is Tom has shared stories about his clients. And that's an opportunity for you to actually go back to Tom and talk more about that, because that scenario might be perfect for what your needs are as well. Okay, folks, do check us out on successinsightpodcast.com. And we're on LinkedIn and Facebook on our Success Insight podcast pages. We'd love to hear what you think about this episode or the other 5 episodes with Tom, or any episode for that matter, on our main pages on social sites and on the podcast platforms: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and especially Spotify, where we have organized playlists. So coaching and consulting, which is where Tom's 6 episodes are going to reside. And we really love the Spotify platform because it allows us to organize and market our podcast episodes depending on what the topic is. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Wear your mask, practice social distancing, take care of your friends, your family, but enjoy life, all right? And we will see you on the next episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.